Hello students, in our last lesson on Look Back in Anger, we had discussed Osborne as an angry young man and why does Jimmy look back in anger. In this lesson, we are to discuss Look Back in Anger as a muddled play. So why do we call Look Back in Anger a muddled play? Joan Russell Taylor has to say about it that Look Back in Anger is demonstrably a muddled play. Muddled, that is, in what it has to say and the way it says it. But this naturally is only a minor consideration. A play is about people, not necessarily about ideas. And what matters is not that Jimmy is a mass of contradictions, because most of us are a bundle of contradictions, but that Osborne has managed to make them into a convincing dramatic representation of a complex being and one who offered a rallying point for a number of people from the post-war generation, and who felt, these post-war generation people, they felt that the world of today was not treating them according to their deserts. And this is what Jimmy also feels. It may be argued, though, that Osborne achieved this partly at the expense of his other characters. To build up Jimmy, he has had a certain extent to scale down the rest in order to scale Jimmy up. And paradoxically, the only other person in the play who measures up to him in solidity and conviction is Elizon's father, the Colonel. Partly, no doubt, because he is the only one we never see with Jimmy. That is, on the stage, we never see Jimmy and the Colonel together. And he is not subjected to Jimmy's normal barrage. It is, however, a general trait in Osborne's work that he ends to sympathize with his hero in writing to such an extent that the other characters are made to capitulate to him almost without a struggle, and the scope of genuine dramatic conflict is thereby reduced, because Osborne seems to be on the side of his hero. Anthony Hartley in The Spectator says, Joan Osborne's play is about three subjects at once. As a basis, there is the psychology of the modern romantic, one of the young man who behind all his toughness and rudery is perpetually, constantly building idealized images of people and things, which are unable to live up to, and they turn to bitterness within him. And his situation is made worse by the fact that in the present day world there is no cause to which he can give himself wholeheartedly. He cannot be committed to anything in the modern world, no center on which he can concentrate his adolescent dreams. This is the second theme of the play. In the 30s, Jimmy Porter would have been a communist and fought in Spain, but now there is nothing for him but to work on a sweet stall along with his friend Cliff and relieve nostalgic memories of the time when he seemed to be something to believe in. So anarchism is, of course, a sterile attitude, except when it is held by the artist. Jimmy Porter is no artist. One feels at the end of the play that he will talk and talk in his attic flat in an industrial town until he rots. So his anger brings about, or it is unable to bring about, any positive change in society. Emerging from extreme youth, most people accept the world and a few transcend it. He can do neither. So Jimmy is unable to do either of these. In this sense, Osborne's play is a tragedy. The actual action of the play is centered around Jimmy's relationship with his wife Elizon, and his anarchism here develops into the familiar pattern of Strindberg's love-hate relationship between the sexes. Deeply in love, the young couple, Jimmy and Alison, they are perpetually inflicting wounds at each other until eventually the wife feels she can bear no more. Her place in the menage is taken by a friend, Helena Charles, who also feels the same ambivalence in her love for Jimmy. But in her case, it is moving from hatred to love. Osborne brings out very well the appalling side of all this self-destruction, which continues until the calm of desolation is established in the last act, and the tragedy of Jimmy Porter is paralleled finally by that of his wife, Alison. Harold Hobson in the Sunday Times says, there are really two plays in Look Back in Anger. One of them is ordinary and noisy, and Osborne has written it with some wit but more prolixity. The other is sketched into the margin of the first, and it consists of hardly any words at all, but is controlled by a fine and sympathetic imagination and is superbly played also, in long passages of pain and silences by Alison. Jimmy, with his grievances, his anguishes, his angers, his injustices, and his cruelty, holds the center stage. His wit is often amusing and penetrating. The use of the trumpet off stage is excellently contrived to create an atmosphere of breaking nerves. The third act, beginning brilliantly, repeats with one vital difference the opening of the first. So the first scene seems to be repeated in the third act. But the inexhaustible outpouring of vicious self-pity comes near to wearing the audience's patience. It's very heavy on the patience of the audience. In the third act, Jimmy turns out to be settled fairly happily with Helena, as far as he can be happy with anyone. Partly, it seems, because she stands up to him rather more, and partly because he is bound to her by nothing more complicated than lust. So she retaliates, and also he is not bound to her into marriage. Alison Porter is a supplementary in the play. It is not she but her husband who throws into the past a maleficent gaze, but it is her endurance, her futile endeavor to escape, and her final breakdown which are the truly moving parts of the play. The dramatist comes in the end to feel this himself, and it is to Alison when at last she makes her heartbroken, groveling, yet peace-securing submission to whom the final speech of the play is given. There is a poignant moment during the second act when Alison desperately cries, "I want a little peace." It is peace that she gets at the end. So the realism of seedy settings, the vibrant acting, forthright staging, the sordid story, and the pungent dialogues was altogether appropriate here in this play. But this play is limited by the nihilism of its author and the crackle and splutter of fireworks in a mist. For a play characterized by admirably sustained dialogue and taut, fragmentary conflicts, Look Back in Anger was curiously unsatisfying. Equally symptomatic is the inconclusiveness present in the literature of protest. The energy of even so intense a work as Look Back in Anger looks to be begins to run out after the first act, and the wife's return at the end leads to no particular conclusion. The weakening of the play after the first act is perhaps the most conclusive evidence we have that modern drama is in a state of crisis. The play that begins with a jet propulsion of stripped emotion and most flights of fancy and poetry in our theatre seem unexciting. Jimmy's bitterness produces a fine flow of savage talk, but is basically a bore because its reasons are never clearly explained. Why is he actually angry? Why is he venting out his anger in such bitter words? Is not very well explained out by the author. His virtual monologue of self-pity and unrighteous indignation leaves one gasping for spiritual breath. The author too did not persuade us wholly that the characters really spoke for a lost, maddened generation. In Look Back in Anger, Osborne rakes a muck heap with the talent of an immature Tennessee Williams and wraps up his findings in a virtuoso display of passionate overwriting that makes us look forward in high hope to his next play, which are not even of the standard of the present play. Indeed, the failure of this play is its inability to be coherent about its despair. Jimmy is unhappy about his life, but why is he unhappy, or why is he venting out his anger in such bitterness is not very well explained out, and the reasons or the causes for this that the author gives, they are not ample enough, they are not satisfying enough. Why is a university educated man running a sweet stall, and why not has he opted for some other profession? What else does he want to do beside blowing a trumpet? What has turned him into this pugnacious bore other than the fact that he saw his father die? So this is not a very satisfying kind of a reason for him to be so very bitter about things. We are left to work out our own causes. So futility is the only clue we are left with. The ending of the play is also ambiguous. Jimmy is confronted with Alison's real suffering in the end and her degradation, and the appalling knowledge that this what in his anger he had been demanding of her. Himself, he breaks under the strain and has to appeal for mercy. The confrontation seems to awake him to the blasphemy and immaturity of his excesses of anger, and possibly it purges it in that moment. Alison herself, having really suffered and then come back, can be presumed to have realized her own defects and to have returned with a deeper commitment to Jimmy's love. So there is a final reconciliation between the husband and wife. They revert to the bears and squirrels game, a refuge from a world which sets cruel steel traps for its animals. It seems possible that this basis of warm animal love might, on the other side of suffering, lead to happiness, though some critics think it otherwise and see in the ending only a temporary further escape into whimsy. Both possibilities are left open, and remarkably so, in a play which has often been thought propagandist in aim. So, till we meet again for the next class, thank you so much.